Thank you for that introduction. My name is Ann Williamson, and I am a fishery management specialist at the National Marine Fisheries Service in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, what we call NOAA Fisheries. I've been with NOAA Fisheries Atlantic Highly Migratory Species, or HMS, I'll be using that acronym a lot, Management Division since 2022. And I primarily work on Atlantic shark regulations. I am based in DC, but I am originally from Delaware. So I heard that we do have someone on the call from Delaware. I think that's very exciting because I so rarely run into Delaware folks outside of the state. And tonight I will be presenting on U.S. federal Atlantic shark fisheries management. So this presentation will introduce our HMS Management Division and provide a brief history of federal Atlantic shark fisheries management. We'll then talk about how exactly we sustainably manage sharks, both commercially and recreationally, and take a look at the results of those efforts. So starting off with some background information. So in 1976, Congress passed the Fishery Conservation and Management Act to foster the long-term biological and economic sustainability of marine fisheries. At the time, Atlantic sharks were managed under 5 Atlantic-based regional fishery management councils. So each council is responsible for developing fishery management plans for the conservation and management of the fisheries in their region. Now, in the late 1970s, the U.S. Atlantic shark fisheries were developing rapidly due to increasing demand for their meat, fins, and cartilage worldwide. As a result, in 1989, those 5 regional fishery management councils asked the Secretary of the Department of Commerce to develop a shark fishery management plan. They were concerned about the late maturity and low fertility of sharks, the increase in fishing mortality, and the possibility of overfishing. So then in 1990, President George H.W. Bush gave the Secretary of Commerce the authority to manage HMS in the U.S. exclusive economic zone of the Atlantic Ocean, Gulf of Mexico, and Caribbean Sea. The Secretary then delegated this authority to NOAA Fisheries through the HMS Management Division. So this brings us to my team, the folks that I work with every day, the HMS Management Division of NOAA Fisheries. So we are responsible for the conservation and management of Atlantic tunas, swordfish, sharks, and billfish in federal waters of the Atlantic Ocean, Gulf of Mexico, and Caribbean Sea. So these species are managed outside of that regional fishery management council process because, unlike many other species of fish, HMS travel long distances and often cross domestic and international boundaries. So there are several laws that drive our work at NOAA Fisheries. Specifically for HMS management, we have the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, which is also referred to as the Magnuson-Stevens Act or the MSA. And this is the primary law that governs the management of marine fisheries in U.S. federal waters. The MSA works to prevent overfishing, rebuild overfished stocks, increase long-term economic and social benefits for fisheries, and ensure a safe and sustainable supply of seafood. Now, we also have the Atlantic Tunas Convention Act. This authorizes us to administer and enforce all provisions of the International Convention for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas, or ICAT, to which the United States is a party. So ICAT is a regional fishery management regional fishery management organization that oversees the conservation and management of a variety of Atlantic marine species, including sharks, even though it has tunas in the name. And they do this in coordination with 52 member nations. So over the years, our management has evolved as we've learned more about sharks and the role that they play in marine ecosystems. And a lot has changed in the last 30 plus years. So we don't have time to cover everything that we've done, but I will highlight some of our actions. Starting off, we implemented the first fishery management plan for sharks of the Atlantic Ocean in 1993. The 1993 FMP established many of the management measures for Atlantic sharks that are the basis for those in place today. We established a fishery management unit of 39 species of Atlantic sharks that we separated into 3 groups: large coastal sharks, small coastal sharks, and pelagic sharks. We also established commercial quotas, permits, and reporting requirements, recreational retention limits, and a prohibition on shark finning. So that's a process of removing shark fins at sea and discarding the rest of the shark. Then, in 1997, we established a prohibited shark species group. So we may add species to the group if they meet a certain set of criteria. For example, if we have biological information that indicates that the species needs protection, if that species is rarely encountered in fisheries, and if it's difficult to distinguish the species from other prohibited species. Then in 1999, we implemented a range of measures to prevent overfishing in commercial and recreational fisheries. We reduced and limited the number of commercial fishermen who can retain sharks. We specified quotas for scientific research and education. And we identified essential fish habitat for HMS. So this refers to habitat that's essential for their survival and reproduction. Then in 2008, we created a shark research fishery for commercial fishermen to collect valuable shark life history and other scientific data. And we required that all Atlantic sharks be offloaded from the vessel with their fins naturally attached. And then in 2017, we implemented several management measures for recreational anglers, including requirements to use circle hooks, which help reduce bycatch mortality, learn safe handling and release techniques, so fishermen can safely release sharks that they don't intend to keep, and in a way that maximizes the survival of the fish, and improve their shark species identification. So you're probably starting to see that we do a lot. And this is true, but we don't operate in a silo. So as I mentioned, sharks often swim beyond jurisdictional boundaries. Therefore, for successful conservation in fisheries management, we must coordinate with our domestic and international partners. At the domestic level, we still coordinate with the Atlantic-based regional fishery management councils that once managed Atlantic sharks. And we are a member of domestic fisheries management organizations, such as the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission and the Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission, which work to coordinate consistent fisheries management across their states. Now, at the international level, we're members of international fisheries management organizations like ICAT that I mentioned earlier. We also support the United States' efforts to carry out provisions of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or CITES. So this is an international agreement designed to ensure that international trade in animals and plants does not threaten their survival in the wild. So several of the Atlantic sharks that we manage are listed under CITES. Now, we also contribute to the Convention on Migratory Species and are a signatory to its Memorandum of Understanding on the Conservation of Migratory Sharks, which helps facilitate international coordination on the assessment and management of sharks with ranges that span multiple nations. So along with these efforts, we also participate in a range of international support activities. For example, we promote our fins naturally attached policy overseas, and we provide technical support for other countries' shark conservation efforts. These can include shark identification trainings and data collection workshops. So through these organizations, we promote the same fisheries management and conservation practices across all jurisdictions. These efforts help level the playing field for U.S. fishermen because they operate in some of the most sustainably managed and heavily regulated fisheries in the world. So shark fisheries management is successful. Because of our collaboration with domestic and international partners and our science-based management structure, we are the leading U.S. authority on shark conservation and fisheries management. And we have some of the best managed and sustainable shark fisheries in the world. However, we know that today, Atlantic shark fisheries are faced with many new challenges, including the impacts of climate change, shark depredation, declining catch and fishery participation, and policy changes. But in spite of these challenges, we are committed to productive and sustainable shark fisheries. So now we're going to get to why you're really here, what you really want to know. How do we do this? How do we sustainably manage sharks? Well, we're going to break things down into 6 steps for sustainable shark fisheries management. Step 1 is on shark research. So scientists spend months at sea and in the lab every year collecting vital data on sharks. Shark research is conducted on NOAA's fleet of research ships and through its cooperative research programs. In these programs, NOAA scientists work with university students, the fishing industry, and other stakeholders to conduct research on sharks. So here we have some photos that show some of what our shark scientists do. And let me see if I can bring up, there, I think that works. So here is a sandbar shark caught during our bottom longline survey in the Gulf of Mexico. Below that, in the bottom left, we have a young sand tiger shark getting tagged on the Delaware Bay. So I actually took this photo a few years ago. I had an opportunity to get out on the water, and it was really great to see firsthand the type of data that our scientists collect. And these tags that we place on the sharks help collect location data and other environmental data so we can understand more about where sharks are moving and what sort of habitats that they like to be in. In the top middle, we have a lemon shark vertebrae. So if you can see, there are these little pink dots, and these mark the vertebrae bands. And scientists use this information to identify the age of a shark. And then down below there, we have a young bull shark that has a tag. This is one of my coworkers who took this photo in the HMS Management Division. And then in the top right, we have someone measuring a young tiger shark. This was also caught on our bottom longline survey in the Gulf of Mexico. This is a longstanding survey that's gone on for many years, and we get a lot of great data out of it. And then below that, this is a microscopic view of a lemon shark's skin. And they have what are called dermal denticles, which are kind of like teeth. So step 2 is on stock assessments. So using the data that's collected during that shark research, we work with our partners to complete shark stock assessments. Stock assessments measure the impact of fishing on a particular fish stock. So they project harvest levels that maximize the number of fish that can be caught every year while preventing overfishing, so the removal of too many fish, protecting the marine ecosystem, and when necessary, rebuilding overfished, so depleted stocks. Now, shark stock assessments use the best information available, and this can include data from fisheries landings, scientific surveys, and biological studies, like the data that's collected during the Gulf of Mexico bottom longline survey. So since 2007, 18 Atlantic shark stocks have been assessed. 11 of those are not experiencing overfishing, and 6 of them are overfished, but we have rebuilding plans in place with strict catch limits. Now, step 3 is on management measures. So this is where my work really comes into play and what I do every day. So we take the results of those stock assessments to set sustainable levels of fishing. And we do this under the authority of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. In order for us to maintain those sustainable levels of fishing, we use a range of science-based tools to effectively manage our fisheries. These range from measures that control harvest rates, like size or retention limits, to measures that ensure robust data collection, like a requirement to carry fisheries observers. These are trained biological technicians that work on board commercial fishing vessels to collect data. That was my first job out of college. Or use electronic monitoring technologies. And as a result, U.S. shark fishermen work under some of the most robust environmental standards in the world. Now, step 4 is on quota monitoring. So we monitor commercial and recreational shark catches to ensure compliance with our domestic and international quotas and catch limits. We regularly look at landings data similar to this table that I have on the screen to monitor harvest rates. Depending on those catch rates, and other considerations, we have several accountability measures that we can employ to speed up or slow down harvest. For example, in the commercial fishery, we can adjust the retention limit. So that's how many sharks that can be caught in a single trip to speed up or slow down harvest. And we can also close a fishery for a period of time if catches are about to reach a quota to make sure that we don't exceed it. Now, in the recreational fishery, we have retention limits, just like in the commercial fishery, but we also have minimum size limits to make sure that any recreational harvest is of fish that are above a certain size. That helps us control harvest rates as well. And step 5 is on law enforcement. So enforcement is a critical component of sustainably managed fisheries. NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement is responsible for making sure that all fishermen in U.S. federal fisheries follow the rules. We have special agents and enforcement officers at the dock and on the water to ensure compliance with U.S. marine resource laws and to take enforcement action when those laws are violated. And step 6, our final step, is on our partners, including you. So we rely on our partners like commercial and recreational fishermen to help keep our shark fisheries sustainable. There are a number of things that fishermen can do to help us maintain a sustainable shark fishery, including having the proper fishing permits, following those retention and size limits, using circle hooks to make sure that we can release any shark safely that we don't want to keep, keeping fins naturally attached, properly identifying shark species, and reporting any shark catch. So, what are the results of these efforts? Well, none of the 43 species of Atlantic sharks that we manage are classified as endangered in U.S. waters under the Endangered Species Act. 2 of them are classified as threatened, a scalloped hammerhead shark population in the Caribbean and off the coast of South America, and oceanic white-tip sharks globally. Management measures are in place to protect these species. I actually helped write the regulations that put those protections in place. And this might be surprising. There's a common misperception that all sharks are in danger of extinction in the United States and around the world. However, this is not the case in the United States. Many U.S. Atlantic shark stocks are healthy, and those that are not are rebuilding. So, why do so many people have this misperception? Well, one factor could be the public's familiarity with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN. The IUCN reports on the extinction risk for species on a global scale. So they look at shark stocks globally, and they use a different set of criteria for listing a species as threatened or endangered than we do at NOAA Fisheries. So one example of this regional versus global difference is the blacktip shark. The blacktip shark is a fully rebuilt, healthy stock in the U.S. Atlantic, but it's categorized as vulnerable by the IUCN due to threats that the species faces in other parts of the world. So our scientists do participate in the species assessments for the IUCN, but ultimately we base our management actions on U.S. laws like the Endangered Species Act and not IUCN designations. So understanding the status of U.S. shark populations versus global is critical for implementing effective management measures that balance conservation with human interactions. So now let's look at the commercial shark fishery. Most sharks harvested in commercial and recreational shark fisheries are healthy. In fact, in 2023, more than 96% of all U.S. Atlantic shark landings were from 6 healthy species. The majority of those were spiny dogfish and smoothhound sharks, but they also include blacktip, Atlantic sharpnose, fine-tooth, and blue shark. And we do have those species that are overfished, like sandbar shark and dusky shark, but we manage those under rebuilding plans with strict catch limits that are based on the best available science. and we very closely monitor and enforce those limits. For example, the sandbar shark, they're only authorized in our shark research fishery, so they can only be caught with the intention of collecting data. And dusky sharks are one of our prohibited sharks. They cannot be caught in commercial or recreational fisheries. So I know that was a lot of information. So in conclusion, to sort of help wrap things up, NOAA Fisheries has successfully managed shark fisheries since 1993, but the foundations for shark management started in the 1970s. We are the leading U.S. authority on shark conservation and fisheries management, and we have some of the best managed and sustainable shark fisheries in the world. Our success is due to our collaboration with our domestic and international partners, our science-based management structure, and effective enforcement of our fisheries regulations. And we are committed to continuing our work with the fishing industry, recreational anglers, conservation groups, and others to ensure that we maintain productive and sustainable fisheries. And thank you so much for the opportunity to present this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I also have my contact information listed up here on the screen if you want to follow up later. And I did want to take a moment to flag that we have a ton of shark-related resources available on the NOAA Fisheries website, which I have listed here. In 2023, we celebrated 30 years of shark fisheries management, and we put out a ton of new material. So if you search some of these titles on our website, you can find a lot of interesting content, and I really encourage everyone to check them out. And thank you.
Well, thank you, Anne. That was wonderful. And what a wonderful way to start off 2025, especially with some good news. I know that I'm so pleased to hear that our shark fisheries are doing so well, because we operate under the umbrella of they're doing so poorly, so globally. But if you want to go ahead and unshare, and we'll do Q&A. Let me put a spotlight on you here. Okay, I agree, Barbara. If you have a question for Anne, you can raise your hand. You can unmute and ask her yourself, or you can put it in the chat box. Now, I have a question. I'll start everybody off. It seems like it's very well and highly managed in terms of limits and this. With the law enforcement area, how well are those laws adhered to in our waters?
That is a good question, and I can't say I'm going to have a great answer because I am not very closely involved with law enforcement, but we do have enforcement officers that are out on the water and at the dock every day, and we also coordinate with the U.S. Coast Guard as well as state enforcement programs that are out on the water. So there is a lot of coverage. It's a lot of area. The ocean is quite large. The EEZ is 300 to 200 nautical miles offshore. It's a huge area. But I am hopeful that we have, our enforcement officers out there that are able to monitor and make sure that, to the extent that they can, that our regulations are followed.
Okay. Alan has his hand up. Go ahead, Alan.
Hi, Anne. Happy New Year, and thanks so much. This was great. Two questions. First one is really what you were talking about, just in terms of at the end, you showed sort of the commercial, what the data was for the commercial. I mean, is the tracking as accurate for kind of the recreational, or someone that just has a dock and they go out from their home? And, how, number one, how accurate can that data be? And number two, is it really would it still be like a small amount relative to commercial? So that's the specific question. But I think I'll say me, I can't speak for everyone here, but I think part of why I attend these is to really find out how you got into this, your interest, and what's your passion with this, including that you said you worked on a commercial vessel for a while. So kind of interesting to know some of that background. So take that in whatever order. And thanks again.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the questions. So we have much more commercial data than we do recreational because we have a lot of data streams to bring in information. So our commercial fishermen have a lot of reporting requirements. We get reports from every trip, and we have dealer reporting requirements. So when commercial fishermen go to the dealer to sell their catch, we get reports from the dealers as well. So we're getting a lot more information that can be based, they can actually weigh the fish at the dealer. So we're getting exact weights. And we have fisheries observers that are on board doing the data collection, measuring everything, weighing everything, and the electronic monitoring where we have systems that can, computers that can calculate this information. So that's to say, we're pretty confident in our commercial data, and it's very good data. On the recreational side, we don't have as many data streams. We do have recreational reporting requirements. Our marine recreational interceptor information reporting, MRIP, it's called MRIP, is a recreational reporting mechanism that we have, but it's not as robust. It requires MRIP interviewers to be at the docks and kind of interviewing the folks that are fishing. We have some like phone reporting requirements. It's not as much, so we don't have as much confidence in it, but we are still able to collect helpful information. And the recreational also, I'll say, is not, it's not as much data as commercial. The majority of our shark recreational fishermen are participating in catch and release fishing. So they enjoy the fishing, they enjoy the activity, but they don't necessarily want to keep the shark. So they'll catch the shark and then they'll release it. So that also kind of, it impacts the amount of data that we're able to collect because they're not actually retaining the fish.
So what about you?
Yeah, what about you? And then I have a brief follow-up.
Oh, my background, or how I got into this. So I grew up on the water. I grew up in Lewis, Delaware, and I was sailing and at the beach all the time. So I've always had a love for the ocean. I had my first job out of college, I mentioned, was as a fisheries observer. So I was based in New England and I was going out on commercial groundfish and scallop fishing vessels and doing that data collection that we need for effective management. And that really opened my eyes to the commercial fisheries that we have in the Atlantic in general. And in school, I studied environmental issues, environmental policy, and I really wanted a career where I could merge that academic focus and interest as well as my own passions and love for the ocean and interest in sustainable fisheries.
That's great. So great that you can study and get your passion too, and that's fantastic. So the follow-up, I think the recreational I get, you can't really get a handle on it, but it wouldn't be that this threat would come from that sector anyway. If there was going to be any large threat to shark species, would you say it's not going to come from the recreational fisherwomen?
I think it's hard to say. I would say the way things are right now, being a predominantly catch and release fishery, it's a lower risk, but fishery people change their behaviors. There could be a point where there's more interest in catching sharks and retaining them. So It really depends.
And you didn't explain this, but I'm going to make an assumption. I could be very well wrong. And this is my last question, I promise. The idea with having the shark fins on, is that because they might like cut the fins off, keep the fins, which are valued in certain whatever geographical areas, and then just send the shark back in the water?
Yes, so we don't, I mean, the shark finning has been illegal since 1993. So that's been in place for a long time, but we don't, it's a very wasteful practice. It's not, we don't want any shark finning. But keeping the fins attached does a couple things. We're consistent with our laws. We currently have a fin ban in the United States, but it also helps us properly ID a species. So even if the sharks, before the shark fin ban, if the fins were removed, we can't properly identify what species that fin came off of. So by keeping them attached, we're able to properly species ID, and then that helps us with our monitoring and our tracking.
Thank you. All right, another questions? Raise your hand. You can unmute. I'll call on you, or you can put it into the chat box. I have a question about the fisheries in general. You talked about why are there commercial fisheries takings of the shark? Are they for food? Is it for skin? Is it just bycatch that is coming into it?
We do have targeted shark fisheries and shark trips. So they are, we do have fishermen going out there looking to catch sharks, and it's predominantly, I would say now, a meat market. People eat the meat, and there's a domestic market for that, and there's also an international market. So some of our shark catch does get exported outside of the United States.
Okay, interesting. What about the tracking of the species? You said that they are in 3 different groups. And do they all stay in our waters, or do they go into other waters? And how do we track ones that are tagged, or follow them and monitor them as they go outside of our waters?
Yes. So it depends on the species. We have some large coastal sharks and small coastal sharks that they may occur across the globe, but we have US Atlantic specific stocks. So that genetic population stays within US waters. We also have pelagic sharks that we manage, and those often go into international waters and beyond, like our oceanic white-tip shark or our short-fin mako shark. So those are leaving and returning to U.S. waters. For the sharks that are tagged, we do have like receivers, or these buoys that can receive the tag data throughout US waters and in international waters as well. So we can see when there is tracking data and they are going out beyond US waters. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, they're not, I mean, they're part of the stock, but they're not they can go where they want to go, I guess. And then they're in other waters, and they're with other laws, which brings me to the next question. Is we have such a wonderful suite of regulations and monitoring and enforcement. That is not the case in other countries. You said that I'm sure that some of the work that you're doing in the international coalitions and groups is to share what is working with us for our fisheries with other folks. How receptive are other countries to looking at the success that we've experienced here and modeling those elsewhere?
Yeah, I think the US is very highly regarded for how sustainable our shark fisheries are. I mentioned ICAT, the which is the regional fishery management organization that we're a party of, that manages the marine species in the Atlantic, which is like our tunas and our and some of our pelagic sharks. So we have in the HMS Management Division in the United States has staff that work with ICAT. They work with the 51 other member nations to come up with management measures that apply for the whole like Atlantic Ocean basin. So there needs to be for these species that do go into different countries and out into international waters, there needs to be that consistent management. So we're working with those other countries for that consistency. And, you know, things aren't always going to line up perfectly. We might have some more strict regulations that another country is, but we're always working with them to get on the same page, to have that consensus and to help, improve data collection and species identification and all of those things that we need for that effective management.
And what about the fisher people and the businesses? Is there a lot of pushback for regulations, or have they kind of embraced them because they can see the results?
It depends on what we're doing, what our regulation is on. I didn't touch on this in my presentation, but we have an advisory panel that is made up of representatives from our HMS fisheries, commercially, recreationally, environmental organizations, and those in academia. So we have a panel of professionals with expertise in our species and in our fisheries, and they give us feedback on what we're working on what we're doing. So we meet with them several times a year, but we also communicate with them, all year long. And we present, what our proposed rules are. And we have that back and forth because they're the folks that are out on the water, that have the scientific expertise, that are on the water, seeing firsthand what's going on out there. They can give us really valuable feedback, and we take what we hear from them, what their feedback is on our rules, what they think our priorities should be, like what they need us to focus on to help them. And we take all of that into consideration when we decide, what we're going to do in our rulemakings. So we really highly value their input. That doesn't mean that they're always going to agree with everything that we do, though.
Right. Is part of the work also, I mean, having healthy shark populations help as a keystone species for the ecology of the oceans? And do you see a direct cascade, a positive cascade in terms of marine health and ecology because of the increased shark resources?
It's an interesting question because we're still learning a lot about that. A lot of our sharks are data poor species. We don't have a ton of research on them. And also climate change is, we don't know what the impacts are going to be on a lot of our stocks. So we're still figuring out, like how these different environmental variables are impacting our species that we manage and how they're impacting others. A lot of fishermen complain about shark depredation, that there's too many sharks in the ocean now. They're eating their catch, so there's a lot of shark and human interaction that if you ask different people, they might give different answers to that question.
Alan, go ahead.
No one else has a question? I want to just ask no.
I have a question.
So I had two questions really on that related on that people interaction thing. So it's whether it may have nothing to do with the work that you do or the department even, but two things, do the dots connect between, let's say, data you may be getting on numbers and where the sharks are, and sort of Coast Guard getting information, hey, there's a bunch of sharks that are getting close into where humans are bathing, or scuba diving, number one. And number two, is there any interface in terms of like the shark cage stuff, those experience things? Does that touch you at all in any way, or are there regulations that touch that in any way?
Yeah, I would say that, we take in all of the data. So we have a lot of tagging data, and we can see how that might overlap with coastal areas that are very popular destinations for ocean recreation, and beach going, or seal populations. We get that data from our scientists. We get the reports if there are interactions. So we use all of that information. It helps us paint a complete picture. And we don't really work with the shark tourism side of things, the ecotourism. We do issue exempted fishing permits. So if there's a research activity to go out and collect data on sharks, and that has a education component to it, we're going to review those types of actions to make sure that they comply with our laws. But we don't need to do that specifically for like shark dives.
All right, somebody else had a question. I see their hand up. Go ahead.
This is Adrian. And my apologies, I'm on a cell phone. So in listening to your talk, a population is considered healthy, not healthy. And there has to be a whole series of assumptions going into what is the right number of sharks that we are expecting, or that we think is the sustainable number, or et cetera. What is your personal feeling on how good are those numbers that are underlying these calculations?
I would say that they get better with the more data that we have. So we have some stocks that were assessed many, many years ago that have been reassessed with new data that is more accurate, and we have more of it. So the more data that we have that's robust, the better those stock assessments are, the more confidence that we can have in the data. So we know when we get a stock assessment, the level of uncertainty we have based on how robust the stock assessment is. We have all of that information. So if we have less confidence in our scientific data, we might be more conservative with the management measures that we put in place, because we're not too sure and we want to be careful. But for some of our stocks, we have a lot of data. We have very robust stock assessments. So we can be a little bit less conservative. We can be a little bit closer to the information that we have, because we're more confident that that is an accurate number that we can base our management on. So we take a different approach depending on the information that we have on that species, and that changes, with each year.
Okay, thank you. And one other question. So besides sharks moving in and out of U.S. territorial waters or whatever, that I would assume that the fishery is also subject to boats, ships from other countries. And how good are we at policing those guys and what they're landing?
So we only have authority over US vessels. So those in, well, the vessels in our waters and any US flagged vessels in like the high seas. So any vessels of a foreign, like foreign vessels, they have um, there are regulations in place, and our Coast Guard and our enforcement kind of are able to monitor those. But we don't, like, I don't know too much about where there's overlap there.
Thanks.
So if a vessel from another country is in our waters, they have to abide by our rules.
Yes, they would.
Why do you say it that way?
Because I'm not, I don't work with any non-US flagged vessels, so I don't know if to the extent that they're even in US waters or if they're just on the high seas.
Gotcha. But the regulations govern anybody and everybody who's in our waters. It's our waters, and those are our rules. So you're coming to us, you need to abide by those rules, I'm assuming. Like if we go to another country, we're abiding by those rules.
So we would only, so our vessels would only be in US waters and on the high seas where they would need to follow our regulations, and foreign vessels would only be in their nations or on the high seas, not in US waters. So we wouldn't have them in our EEZ.
Okay, that's what Carl just wrote. Foreign fishing vessels are not allowed to fish in US waters. There you go. All right. Do we have any other questions for Anne tonight? These have been great. Well, if not, thank you, Anne, so much for coming and spending time with us this evening, giving us an overview of our Atlantic fisheries and all of the work that you and your colleagues are doing domestically as well as internationally. It seems like our fisheries are in good hands and they're doing well, which is wonderful news. Did you hear the news, everybody? That's good news. Go and share it with folks. And everybody, stay well, stay curious, stay outside, but stay warm. And we'll see you next week for the plant smells, the defense mechanisms that plants do to communicate, that plants are communicating with other plants and other insects to help them when they need it. So take care, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.